a composite or a supplementary type of perception of what Darwin had presented, fundamentally the survival of the species. Lamarckian concept of life is about understanding the commensurate and the correlationary and collaborative aspect of life, and that is that we are constantly adapting to shifts and changes which cause us to evolve to another level, and those changes are not in spite of the necessity to try to react or respond to the survival instinct, but rather to grow and to adapt to a necessity, which is something that entails an expanding and an encompassing type of process, rather than separating ourselves on the basis of survival alone. My take on that is that quite probably such a perception didn't suit the powers that be so well, so they pushed it aside and said, well, here are the reasons for why we have good cause to promote survival of the species. It's because it's there as a strong theory, if you like, that's been put forward by Darwin, and it is a very good reason why the entire Industrial Revolution and the capitalist theory has moved in the direction that it has, and with the propensity and the power that it has.
Now, Elisabet, do you believe Darwinian theory actually is perhaps even dangerous?
Well, yes, Harun, I think it already has, in its social interpretations, it's already proved very dangerous, of course, because it justified changing children to machines and anything up to the Holocaust and who knows what else, you know. But many scientists will argue, well, those are inappropriate social interpretations. But they don't argue, they don't recognize the politicization of science, and they should. And Konstantin is quite right in saying that, you know, Lamarck didn't suit the powers that be, because they wanted the strictly Darwinian evolution through a struggle, a hostile struggle for survival, a competitive struggle. And I wanted to mention a few other things that Konstantin says that I totally agree with, is that science itself has, through physics at least, invalidated a number of these assumptions, including the one about the non-living universe. And a corollary of the non-living universe, of course, is that life comes from non-life, that intelligence comes from non-intelligence, that consciousness comes out of non-consciousness. In other words, consciousness is seen as a late emergent product of this material universe, all the way after billions of years of evolution, when nervous systems can squeeze it out, so to speak. And the Eastern sciences, such as the Taoist and Vedic, which Konstantin referred to, the ancient sciences, they were completely unified in consciousness, because they took the opposite view, that rather than being a late emergent product of material evolution, consciousness was primary and material evolution occurred within consciousness as part of it, that consciousness can gel itself into matter by stepping down frequency, or however we would explain it nowadays. So it's an entirely 180-degree opposite assumption. And that's why it's so important for people who think of themselves as scientists to ask themselves, what are my unproven assumptions about science? Do I still believe in a non-living universe that gives rise to consciousness late in the game, or do I think consciousness is the more primary? I don't want to say comes first, because in the great eternal now, all is present at once. But either matter or consciousness must be primary. They can't both be, I don't think.
Okay, and so tell me this: how do you envisage a scientist who may have been brought up in the old views, in the old ways, who's been perhaps researching a particular theory and trying to prove it for the last, 25, 30 years, how easy is it to expect them to then suddenly drop that view and say, hey, maybe the Newtonian mechanistic world maybe wasn't so correct. Maybe my assumptions were not so correct. I mean, how do you see that happening?
Well, the fact is that it has happened to many scientists. And
right.
When I staged a couple of international symposia on the foundations of science, I deliberately chose scientists who had made what I call that 180-degree shift so that they were capable of listing both the assumptions they had been taught and the assumptions they had switched over to. And I think it would be fascinating to be able to poll scientists all over the world to see how different their fundamental assumptions are, because this is something not talked about.
Right. That's exactly what we're trying to do. With interviewing the caliber person like yourself, Elisabet, and Konstantin. So that's actually very important. We're actually also doing this, doing our best to do this at the Orassy Kendron as well through the work with scientists like yourself. Now, I've done a lot of research, particularly on global geopolitical situations. We're currently seeing unprecedented levels of manipulation and deceit by governments and institutions across the globe. For example, the BP oil spillage in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't believe was an accident. Obama's continuous U-turns on his pledges to the American public and so on. So how do we evolve beyond our current condition collectively and on an individual level so that we can actually change those manifestations?
Well, you've touched on a very important matter in saying that we can be deceived. And, of course, when you have the dominant culture in a position, as they have been, to make their economic and political system a dominant world system, and they are based solely on a competitive model, then you see that competitive models really drive deception, because if in business the bottom line is profits and not planet and people, then you're going to do everything possible to survive against your competitor, including lying about what you're doing. So it's a system that fosters deception. And so one of the things that we have to do is start looking for the transparency, noting that it is coming out in the world, that it's getting harder and harder for companies and banks to lie, for, the Catholic Church is in trouble over non-transparency. It is coming out everywhere, and it's part of our building the future that deception must end, and that what we do when we build our systems has to be completely transparent and open. Another way that deception came in was telling us that we could keep throwing stuff away and that we could keep throwing it into the skies and the seas and the ecosystems, and that there wouldn't be a problem. It would all be absorbed. And now we find that it's not that way. We're on a finite planet. And whether or not you believe in global warming, we sure need to get this planet clean and green, and our human economic system in line with the rest of the nature's systems. And I'm talking now not about the immature competitive ones, but the mature cooperative ones, because my evolution theory shows that only young species engage in hostile competition. It's an important youthful phase where they're very creative and acquisitive, but it has to give way, just as human individuals do, to becoming good citizens in community. And our community is now the whole Earth, so it's humanity's turn to grow up as a species, become cooperative, become transparent, not deceive each other, and build a clean world.
So, Konstantin, tell me, what are your thoughts on all these lies and deceptions, and how we can move away from being controlled by such lies and deceivers?
Well, firstly, I would very much agree with what Elisabet just said regarding what fosters what, which is what I was referring to earlier when I said that the Industrial Revolution really was very powerfully supported by a scientific theory called evolution and survival of the fittest. And then it gave